The freezing January water bit into Clara's skin like a million icy needles, screaming at her to let go. Everyone in the isolated town of Oak Haven knew the unwritten rule. What belongs to the woods stays in the woods, especially the wolves. Out here, they weren't just animals. They were folklore made flesh, nightmares with teeth that the elders whispered about. But looking at the massive black creature thrashing weakly in the current, its golden eyes dimming with exhaustion, Clara couldn't just watch it drown. She reached out, fingers tangling in thick, wet fur, sealing her fate with a single act of forbidden mercy. She didn't know it then, but by pulling him from the river, she was pulling a war right to her doorstep. Oak Haven was the kind of town where history wasn't written in books. It was etched into the terrified glances people cast toward the tree line after dusk. It was a community held together by fear as much as necessity, nestled deep in the Pacific Northwest, where the sprawling pines seemed to hold secrets older than the mountains themselves. Clara hated the fear. She found it suffocating. At 24, she stayed in Oak Haven, mostly out of obligation to her aging aunt's property, a slightly dilapidated cabin sitting uncomfortably close to the edge of the shadowed forest. She worked remotely as a graphic designer, a digital tether to the modern world that felt light years away from the superstitious murmurs of her neighbors at the general store. The warning had been delivered to her just yesterday by old Elias, the town's self-appointed historian and chief monger of doom. "Seen tracks near the North Ridge, Clara," Elias had rasped, leaning over her fence, his eyes watery with age and genuine terror. "Big ones. Too big. Don't you go wandering past the river boundary. And if you see one of them, don't touch it. Don't even breathe the same air. You turn and you run." Clara had just nodded politely. She didn't believe in the werewolf legends that kept the town indoors after sunset, but she respected the very real bears and cougars. That Tuesday afternoon, however, the threat wasn't a predator stalking her. It was the sound of distress. Clara was breaking apart fallen branches near the turbulent rush of the Blackwood River, the natural border between Oak Haven land and the deep, untamed wilds. The winter air was crisp, stinging her lungs, and the river was swollen with recent snowmelt, a churning ribbon of grey violence. Then she heard it. A high-pitched yelp, followed by a guttural, drowning choke. She dropped her bundle of firewood and jogged toward the bank. The sound was raw, primal, and undeniably pathetic. Peering over the slick rocks, her breath hitched. It was huge, caught in an eddy behind a large boulder, thrashing against the relentless current, was a wolf. It was pure midnight black, a stark contrast to the frothing white water. Even partially submerged, Clara could tell it was freakishly large, easily the size of a small deer. Panic, the inherited instinct of Oak Haven, flared in her chest. "Don't touch that wolf," Elias's voice echoed in her head. This was a wild animal, an apex predator. The smart thing, the safe thing, was to walk away. Nature was cruel. This was just its way. The wolf's head went under again. It surfaced sputtering, its movements growing frantic and weak. Then it looked at her. Clara froze. The beast's eyes weren't the flat, reflective yellow of a normal animal. They were a startling, vivid gold, burning with an intelligence and a terrifying awareness that sent a jolt straight down her spine. There was no aggression in that gaze, only a desperate, silent plea. "Damn it," Clara whispered. She couldn't watch it die. Shoving her fear down, she scrambled down the icy bank, her boots slipping on slick mud. The cold radiating from the water hit her face before she even touched it. She grabbed a sturdy root jutting from the bank with one hand and leaned out as far as she dared. "Come on!" she yelled over the roar of the water, extending her other hand. The wolf seemed to understand. It lunged, a last desperate burst of energy, its massive front paws scrabbling against the rock. Clara grabbed a handful of the thick scruff at its neck. The weight was immense. It felt like trying to pull a soaked anvil from the river. Her shoulder screamed in protest. The wolf was dead weight, its energy spent. Clara gritted her teeth, digging her heels into the frozen mud, pulling with everything she had. Slowly, agonizingly, she dragged the creature onto the rocky bank. They both collapsed in a heap, gasping for air. Clara lay on her back, staring at the grey sky, her heart hammering against her ribs. Beside her, the great beast huffed, steam rising from its soaked fur. She sat up cautiously. Now that it was on land, the sheer size of the animal was terrifying. It was easily 160 pounds of muscle and teeth, but it didn't move toward her. It just lay there, shivering violently, those unnerving golden eyes tracking her every move. That's when she saw the blood pooling beneath its flank. A jagged, ugly tear ripped through the fur on its right side, oozing dark crimson onto the snow-dusted rocks. It wasn't a natural wound. It looked clean, like a blade or a very large trap had done the damage. The wolf whined, a low, vibrating sound in its chest, and tried to stand, only to collapse again with a pained snarl. Clara stood up, her mind racing. She couldn't leave it here. It would freeze to death or bleed out within hours. But bringing a wolf this size, into her home was insanity. It was the fastest way to get herself killed, or worse, exiled by the town. The wolf looked up at her again. The intelligence in those eyes was undeniable. It was judging her, waiting for her decision. "Don't touch that, wolf. If you bite me," Clara said, her voice shaking slightly as she approached the massive head, "I swear I'll finish what the river started." The wolf blinked slowly, almost sluggishly, and laid its head on its paws in submission. Clara took a deep breath and began the arduous task of figuring out how to move 200 pounds of wounded predator 300 yards to her cabin without anyone seeing. It took nearly an hour. Clara had to use an old tarp from her shed as a makeshift sled, dragging the semi-conscious wolf over the frost-hardened ground. Every muscle in her body burned by the time she managed to haul the creature up the porch steps and into her living room. She kicked the door shut, locking out the cold and the prying eyes of Oakhaven. Her cabin was warm, smelling of cedar and wood smoke. The presence of the wild animal in her domestic space felt jarring, wrong. The wolf took up nearly half the rug in front of the stone fireplace. Clara moved quickly, adrenaline still masking her exhaustion. She grabbed her first aid kit, towels, and a bowl of water. Approaching the wolf was nerve-wracking. She knelt beside its flank, her hands trembling slightly as she pushed back the thick, soaked fur to examine the wound. The wolf flinched, a low growl rumbling in its throat. But it didn't snap. "Easy," she murmured, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm trying to help." The gash was deep, slicing through muscle. It needed stitches, lots of them. Clara wasn't a vet, but she'd grown up on a farm before moving to Oakhaven. She knew the basics of wound care. She worked for the next 2 hours, cleaning the wound with saline, applying antiseptic, and awkwardly bandaging the massive torso. The wolf watched her the entire time. It never took those golden eyes off her face. It was unnerving. There was no animalistic glazing over, no instinctual panic. It was a calculated observation. By the time she was finished, night had fallen completely. The cabin was lit only by the fire and a single lamp. The wolf had stopped shivering and seemed to be dozing, its breathing heavy but regular. Clara collapsed onto her sofa, staring at the creature. What had she done? If Elias or Sheriff Miller found out about this, the hysteria would be uncontrollable. They'd come here with guns before asking questions. A sharp knock on her front door made her jump nearly a foot in the air. The wolf's head snapped up instantly, a low, menacing growl filling the room. It was a sound that vibrated through the floorboards, primal and terrifying. "Shh!" Clara hissed frantically at the wolf, putting a finger to her lips. The knock came again, louder this time. "Clara? You in there? I saw your light." It was Sarah, her nearest neighbor, a woman whose kindness was only exceeded by her insatiable curiosity. Sarah was the town gossip hub. If she knew, everyone knew. Clara's heart slammed against her ribs. "Just a second, Sarah," she called out, her voice cracking. She looked at the wolf. The black beast was attempting to stand, its hackles raised, teeth bared in a silent snarl directed at the door. It was ready to defend itself, or her. "No, no, stay down!" Clara whispered frantically, motioning with her hands. Miraculously, the wolf obeyed. It lowered itself back onto the rug, though its golden eyes remained fixed on the door with lethal intensity. Clara quickly threw a large knitted afghan over the creature, obscuring its shape as best she could in the dim light. It just looked like a pile of blankets in front of the fire. Clara cracked the door open just enough to show her face, blocking the view inside with her body. "Sarah, hi. What's up? It's late." Sarah, bundled in a neon pink parka, peered at her inquisitively. "I know, honey, but I saw you dragging something big from the tree line earlier. Looked awful heavy. Just wanted to make sure you were okay. You didn't bag a deer out of season, did you?" Sarah winked conspiratorially. Clara forced a laugh. It sounded brittle. "A deer?" "No, just some really waterlogged firewood. The river saturation makes it weigh a ton." Sarah tried to peek past Clara's shoulder. "Smells like wet dog in here. Or something musky." "Oh, I spilled some old hunting lure I found in the shed," Clara lied, feeling sweat trickle down her back despite the cold. "It stinks, trying to air it out." A low rumble came from beneath the afghan by the fire. Sarah's eyes widened. "What was that?" "My stomach," Clara said immediately, clutching her midsection. "Something I ate really disagreed with me. Honestly, Sarah, I'm feeling awful. I think I'm going to turn in." Sarah looked unconvinced, but Clara's desperate expression must have swayed her. "Oh, all right then. Well, feel better. But if you need anything, thanks, Sarah. Good night." Clara shut the door perhaps a little too quickly and threw the deadbolt. She leaned against the door, exhaling a shaky breath. That had been too close. She walked back to the fire. The wolf had nudged the afghan off its head. It was looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite pass. It wasn't gratitude. It was something deeper, something possessive. "You have to be quiet," she scolded the apex predator. "You almost got us both killed." The wolf just blinked its golden eyes. Clara didn't sleep in her bedroom that night. She curled up in the armchair with a blanket, clutching an old baseball bat, watching the wolf. Over the next 2 days, a strange routine formed. The wolf healed with impossible speed. The wound that should have taken weeks to close was knitting together within 48 hours. It ate voraciously. Clara went through her entire stock of frozen chicken and steaks and watched her. It followed her with its eyes everywhere she moved. When she sat to work on her laptop, it would drag itself over and lay at her feet. It was terrifying, yet strangely comforting. The isolation of the cabin didn't feel so heavy with the massive presence there. But the intelligence in its behavior became harder to ignore. It didn't act like a dog. It didn't beg or play. It observed. It seemed to understand complex sentences. If she said, "I need to check the fire," it would move out of the way before she even stood up. On the third morning, Clara woke up stiff in the armchair. The fire had burned down to embers. She looked at the rug. The wolf was gone. Panic flared. Had it gotten out? Had it attacked someone? She stood up quickly, her blanket falling away. She scanned the room. The front door was still locked from the inside. The windows were closed. Then she saw it. On the small wooden table near the door, where she kept her keys and mail, something had changed. A small, carved wooden figurine of a raven that usually sat facing the wall had been turned around to face the room. And draped over the back of her sofa, neatly folded, more neatly than she ever folded it, was the afghan she had used to cover the wolf. A chill that had nothing to do with the winter morning swept through her. An animal didn't fold blankets. An animal didn't turn figurines. The wolf hadn't just escaped. It had left. And whatever had left her cabin, it wasn't entirely a wolf. The realization hit her hard, confirming the deepest fears of Oakhaven. The legends weren't just stories to keep children in line. They were warnings. She had touched the wolf. And now she knew something else would be coming to touch her. For 3 days, Oakhaven felt different. The air was heavier, charged with a static electricity that made the hairs on Clara's arms stand up whenever she stepped onto her porch. The silence of the forest wasn't peaceful anymore. It was expectant. Clara tried to return to her normal life. She sat at her computer, designing a logo for a bakery in Seattle. But her mind kept drifting back to the folded blanket and the turned raven figurine. It was impossible. Wolves didn't have thumbs. Wolves didn't have manners. On Friday afternoon, the fragile peace of the town shattered. It started with the sound of an engine, not the rattling cough of the local pickup trucks, but the deep, throaty purr of a high-performance machine. Clara was at Earl's Diner, the only place in town to get decent coffee, when the vehicle rolled down Main Street. It was a matte black Range Rover, sleek and out of place against the backdrop of peeling paint and snow-piled sidewalks. Every head in the diner turned. In Oakhaven, strangers were rare. Strangers with money were bad news. Federal agents, maybe. Old Elias whispered from the booth behind Clara, clutching his cup with trembling hands. They finally came for the woods. Clara watched through the foggy window as the driver's door opened. A boot hit the pavement. Expensive leather, black, polished. Then the man stepped out. The diner went dead silent. Even the sizzle of the grill seemed to pause. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that strained against the fabric of a charcoal wool coat. His hair was dark, swept back in a careless style that looked like he'd just run his fingers through it. He moved with a predator's grace, fluid, silent, and dangerously confident. He didn't look like a tourist. He looked like he owned the pavement he walked on. Clara's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She didn't know his face, but she knew that walk. She knew the tilt of his head as he scanned the street. The bell above the diner door jingled violently as he entered. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He ignored the stares of the locals, walking straight to the counter. "Black coffee," he said. His voice was a low baritone, rough around the edges, like gravel wrapped in velvet. It was the kind of voice that commanded attention without shouting. Earl, the owner, blinked twice before grabbing a mug. "Coming right up. You, passin' through?" The stranger didn't answer immediately. He turned slowly, leaning his back against the counter, and scanned the room. His gaze swept over the farmers, the sheriff in the corner, and then it landed on Clara, and stopped. Clara's breath caught in her throat. His eyes, they weren't brown or hazel. They were gold, vivid, shocking gold, burning with an intensity that stripped her bare. It was him. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The wolf, the wounded beast she had dragged from the river. He wasn't just a wolf. He was a shifter. The legends Elias spouted were real. He stared at her for a long, agonizing moment. There was no gratitude in his expression. It was a look of recognition, mixed with something darker. Annoyance? Possessiveness? He took a step toward her booth. Suddenly, Sheriff Miller stood up, his hand resting instinctively on his holster. "We don't get many visitors this time of year, son. Can I help you with something?" The stranger stopped. He looked at the sheriff with a boredom that bordered on insult. "I'm looking for a property," he lied smoothly, "thinking of buying some land near the river." "River's dangerous," Miller grunted, stepping closer. "Best stick to the main roads." "I like dangerous things," the stranger said, his eyes flicking back to Clara. He took his coffee from Earl, threw a $20 bill on the counter, way too much, and walked toward Clara's booth. The entire diner held its breath. He stopped right at her table. Up close, he was devastatingly handsome, with a sharp jawline and a faint scar running through his left eyebrow. He smelled of rain, expensive cologne, and the wild musk of the forest. "Is this seat taken?" he asked. He didn't wait for an answer. He slid into the booth opposite her. Clara gripped her mug so hard her knuckles turned white. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. He took a sip of his coffee, his golden eyes locking onto hers. "You have something of mine," he said softly, so only she could hear. "And I think you saved my life, which is a problem, Clara." She froze. "How do you know my name?" "I know everything about the woman who touched me," he murmured, leaning in. The intimacy of the phrase made her cheeks burn. "My name is Silas Sterling, and you and I need to talk, not here." "I'm not going anywhere with you," Clara said, trying to summon some courage. "I don't know you." Silas glanced around the diner. "You see these people? They think they're safe. They think the woods are just trees and shadows. If you don't walk out of here with me right now, the things hunting me are going to come looking, and when they pick up my scent on you, they won't be as polite as I am." "Things hunting you?" Clara hissed. "You mean the trap?" His jaw tightened. It wasn't a trap. It was an execution attempt, and they failed. But they won't fail to kill the witness. He stood up, extending a hand. "Come with me, Clara, or stay here and put a target on everyone in this room." Clara looked at Sheriff Miller, who was watching them suspiciously. She looked at old Elias. If Silas was telling the truth, being near him was dangerous, but being away from him might be worse. She stood up, ignoring the sheriff's inquisitive look. "It's okay, Sheriff," she lied, her voice trembling. I think I know him from college." She followed Silas Sterling out into the cold, grey afternoon. As she climbed into the passenger seat of the Range Rover, she realized she had just crossed the line for the second time. First the river, now the car. There was no going back to the graphic design logos and quiet evenings. The drive to her cabin was silent. Silas drove with an aggressive precision, his knuckles white on the leather steering wheel. Clara watched him, her mind racing. A werewolf, a rich werewolf, driving a Range Rover. It was absurd, yet the memory of his fur under her fingers felt more real than anything else. When they pulled up to her cabin, he killed the engine but didn't get out. He turned to face her. "You should have let me drown," he said bluntly. Clara bristled. "You're welcome." "I'm serious," Silas snapped, the golden fire in his eyes flaring. "Do you know what I am? Do you know what happens to humans who involve themselves in pack politics?" "I know you were bleeding out on a rock," Clara shot back, surprised by her own anger. And I know I dragged your heavy ass up a hill. So maybe instead of threatening me, you could explain why I have a target on my back." Silas looked at her, really looked at her, and his expression softened by a fraction. He let out a long sigh, running a hand over his face. "I am the alpha of the Sterling Pack. We control the territory from here to the Canadian border. 3 days ago, my second in command, a man named Declan O'Connor, betrayed me. He used wolfsbane-laced silver, illegal by the way, to weaken me before cutting my flank." "Declan," Clara repeated, the name tasting like poison. "So he wants your job?" "He wants my head," Silas corrected. "He thinks I'm dead. The river should have finished me. But because you pulled me out, because you stitched me up, my scent is all over you, Clara, and your scent is all over me." Clara swallowed hard. "So? You healed? You left?" "It doesn't work like that," Silas said, his voice dropping to a low rumble. "In our law, a life debt creates a bond, a tether. I can feel you right now. I can feel your fear. And Declan, if he gets close enough, he'll smell it too. He'll know I'm alive, and he'll know you're the reason why. He will use you to get to me. So what do we do? I take you to the safe house in Seattle. I deal with Declan. Then you go back to your life." "I can't just leave," Clara protested. "My aunt's house is already compromised," Silas interrupted. He pointed toward the tree line. "Look." Clara squinted. At the edge of the forest, where the shadows were deepest, 3 figures were standing. They weren't animals. They were men, dressed in tactical hunting gear, holding rifles. "Mercenaries," Silas growled. "Declan doesn't just use wolves. He pays human contractors to do the dirty work, hunters who don't ask questions." Panic cold-cocked her. "They found us?" "They found me," Silas said, unbuckling his seatbelt. "Stay in the car." "What? No. Stay. In the car." The command in his voice was absolute, an alpha tone that made Clara's body instinctively want to obey. Silas stepped out of the vehicle. He didn't run. He walked calmly toward the porch, placing himself between the car and the men in the trees. "Gentlemen," Silas called out, his voice booming across the clearing, "you're trespassing." One of the men stepped forward, raising his rifle. "Mr. O'Connor sends his regards, Sterling. He was surprised to hear you were shopping for coffee." "Declan always was a gossip," Silas drawled. He began to unbutton his cuffs. "Tell me, did he pay you enough to die today?" The mercenary laughed. "It's 3 against 1, and you're human right now, boss. No shifting allowed in front of the muggles, remember?" "I don't need to shift to tear your throat out," Silas said calmly. The mercenary fired. Clara screamed. Silas moved with supernatural speed. He didn't dodge, he blurred. By the time the bullet chipped the wood of the porch column, Silas was already closing the distance. He cleared the 20 yards in a heartbeat. Clara watched in horror and awe as Silas Sterling dismantled the armed men. It was brutal. He grabbed the barrel of the first rifle, twisting it like it was made of tin, and kicked the man in the chest with enough force to send him flying back into a tree. The second man tried to draw a knife, but Silas caught his wrist, breaking it with a sickening snap. It wasn't a fight. It was a massacre. He moved like water and hit like a freight train. The third man, realizing he was outmatched, turned and ran back into the deep woods. Silas didn't pursue. He stood there, chest heaving, blood on his knuckles that wasn't his own. He turned back to the car. His eyes were glowing so bright they looked like headlights. He ripped the driver's side door open and jumped in. "We have to go. Now!" You just..." Clara stammered. "I bought us 20 minutes, Silas said, reversing the car violently, tires spinning on the gravel. "Declan will send the pack next, and the pack doesn't miss." As they sped down the winding mountain road, leaving Oakhaven behind, Silas reached over the console. He grabbed Clara's hand. His grip was iron tight. "I'm sorry," he said, and for the first time, he sounded genuinely human. "I never wanted to drag an innocent into this." Clara looked at their joined hands. She could feel the heat radiating from him, a burning fever. "I'm not innocent anymore, Silas. I touched the wolf." Silas glanced at her, a dark smile playing on his lips. "Yes, you did. And now you belong to the story. Where are we going?" "To the one place Declan won't follow," Silas said, turning onto the highway. "The Lion's Den. I have to call in a favor from the vampire syndicates in the city." Clara stared at him. "Vampires? You have to be kidding me." "I wish I were," Silas muttered. "Welcome to the real world, Clara." But as they sped toward the city lights, Clara noticed something. Silas kept checking the rearview mirror, not for enemies, but to look at her. And every time he did, the golden glow in his eyes dimmed a little, replaced by a dark, hungry curiosity. He wasn't just protecting a witness, he was guarding a prize. And Clara wasn't sure which was more dangerous, the wolves hunting them, or the king sitting in the driver's seat. Seattle at night was a galaxy of artificial light, a stark contrast to the suffocating darkness of Oakhaven's woods. The Range Rover cut through the rain-slicked streets of downtown, turning heads not just for the car, but for the aura of danger radiating from it. Silas hadn't spoken for an hour. He was busy making calls on a burner phone he'd pulled from the glove compartment, speaking in codes and hushed tones. Clara stared out the window, watching the Space Needle blur past. She looked down at her hands, dirty, scratched, still stained with the mud of the riverbank. She was wearing hiking boots and a flannel shirt in a city that screamed money and status. "We need to make a stop before we see St. James," Silas said, finally ending his call and tossing the phone onto the dashboard. "St. James? The vampire?" Clara asked, the word feeling ridiculous on her tongue. "Victor St. James. He runs the shipping ports and half the real estate in the Pacific Northwest. We have a complicated history. But he owes me for a border dispute I settled in 19. Silas pulled the car into the underground garage of a sleek, glass-walled high-rise. He parked in a reserved spot that had no number, just a symbol painted on the concrete, a silver wolf. "This is my pied-à-terre," Silas explained as he ushered her toward a private elevator. "Declan knows about the estate in the mountains, but he doesn't know about this. We'll be safe here for a few hours." The penthouse was staggering. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city. It was decorated in minimalist chrome and black leather, cold, masculine, and imposing. "Go shower," Silas commanded, pointing to a hallway. "There are clothes in the walk-in closet. My sister keeps a wardrobe here for when she visits. You look about her size." Clara bristled at the command, but looked down at her muddy jeans. He was right. She retreated to the bathroom, which was larger than her entire kitchen back home. As the hot water hit her skin, the reality of the last few days crashed down on her. She sobbed, just once, a harsh sound that echoed off the marble tiles. Then she pulled herself together. Crying wouldn't stop Declan O'Connor. When she emerged 20 minutes later, she felt like a different person. She had found a simple, elegant black silk dress in the closet. It fit surprisingly well, hugging her curves. She felt exposed, yet armored. She walked into the living room to find Silas standing by the window, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He had changed, too, into a tailored black suit that made his broad shoulders look even wider. He looked less like a wild animal now and more like a CEO, but the predatory stillness was the same. He turned, and the glass paused halfway to his mouth. His golden eyes swept over her, darkening instantly. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with that same static electricity she'd felt in the cabin. "You clean up well, Clara," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "I feel ridiculous," she muttered, tugging at the hem. "I'm a graphic designer who lives in the woods. This isn't me." Silas crossed the room in 3 long strides, stopping just inches from her. He reached out, his fingers hovering near her chin, but he didn't touch her. "You aren't just a designer anymore. You are the woman who brought the Alpha King back from the dead. In our world, perception is power. Tonight, you need to look like you belong at my side, like a queen." Clara looked up at him, her heart pounding. "Is that what I am to you? A prop?" Silas's jaw tightened. "No, you are the only thing keeping me sane right now. The bond, the debt. It's screaming at me to claim you, to mark you so Declan knows you're mine. But I won't do that. Not until you ask." He stepped back, breaking the tension before Clara could suffocate from it. "Let's go. Victor hates it when people are late." The meeting took place at the Obsidian, an underground club that required a retinal scan to enter. The bass of the music thumped in Clara's chest as Silas guided her through the VIP section, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back. Every person they passed, beautiful, pale, ethereal, stopped to look at Silas. They sensed him, a wolf in the den of leeches. Victor St. James was waiting in a private booth, cordoned off by velvet ropes. He was an older man, elegant, with silver hair and eyes that looked like shattered glass. He was sipping a red liquid from a crystal flute that definitely wasn't wine. "Silas Sterling," Victor purred, not rising from his seat. "I heard you were floating belly up in the Blackwood River. Rumors of your demise were greatly exaggerated, I see." "You know how hard I am to kill, Victor," Silas said, sliding into the booth and pulling Clara down beside him. Victor's cold eyes snapped to Clara. He inhaled deeply, his nostrils flaring. "And you brought a human who smells like ozone and wild timber. Interesting." "She's with me," Silas said, his tone a warning growl. "I need safe passage to the airstrip in Tacoma. I have a jet waiting to take us to the council in New York. I need to challenge Declan formally." Victor swirled his drink. "Declan has been busy, Silas. He's already contacted the council. He told them you went mad, rabid, that he had to put you down for the safety of the pack. He's been named acting alpha." Silas gripped the table so hard the wood groaned. "He's a liar." "He is," Victor agreed. "But he is a liar with an army. He has consolidated the packs, and he has put a bounty on your head. $5 million, alive or dead. Mostly dead." Victor leaned forward, his fangs slightly visible. "Why should I help you, Silas? If I hand you over, I get $5 million and a very grateful new alpha neighbor." "Because Declan is sloppy," Silas said coolly. "He'll encroach on your shipping lines within a month. He doesn't respect the treaty. I do. You help me retake my throne, and I give you the rights to the South Docks. Permanently." Victor paused. Greed warred with caution in his eyes. Finally he smiled. "The South Docks. You always did know my price?" He pulled a keycard from his pocket and slid it across the table. "I have a safe house in the industrial district, an old warehouse, reinforced steel, UV lights, silver-lined panic room. Stay there tonight. My men will escort you to the airstrip at dawn." Silas took the card. "Thank you, Victor." "Don't thank me yet," Victor whispered, looking at Clara. "The night is young, and the wolves are howling." The warehouse in the industrial district was a fortress. It was cold, smelling of rust and sea salt, but the security system was state-of-the-art. Silas did a sweep of the perimeter while Clara sat on a crate, shivering despite the heat of the industrial heaters. "It's clean," Silas announced, returning to her. He looked exhausted. The healing process had taken a toll, and the constant vigilance was draining him. He sat on the floor beside her crate, loosening his tie. "You should sleep. We move at 0500. Clara looked down at him. "Silas, why did Declan do it? Why betray you?" Silas sighed, leaning his head back against the crate. "Because I wanted to change things. The old ways. They are brutal. Survival of the fittest. I wanted to integrate more with the human world to stop the territorial wars. Declan believes that makes us weak. He thinks we should rule over humans, not live beside them." He looked at Clara. "He thinks I'm soft. And maybe he's right. Because right now, all I can think about is how terrifying it was to see that mercenary aim a gun at you." Clara reached out, her hand trembling, and touched his hair. It was soft, thick. Silas leaned into her touch, his eyes fluttering shut. "You're not soft," Clara whispered. "You're human. Or human enough." Silas turned his face into her palm, inhaling her scent. "Clara," he breathed, Boom! The heavy steel doors of the warehouse blew inward with a deafening explosion. Clara was thrown backward off the crate, hitting the concrete hard. Her ears rang. Dust and smoke filled the air. Silas was on his feet instantly, a snarl ripping from his throat that shook the walls. Through the smoke, figures emerged, dozens of them. They weren't mercenaries this time. They were wolves, shifters in human form, their eyes glowing yellow and orange in the gloom. And walking through the center of them was a man who looked like a twisted reflection of Silas. He was blonde, broader, with a cruel scar running down his cheek. Declan O'Connor. "Victor sends his regards," Declan shouted over the ringing silence. "He took your offer of the South Docks, Silas. But he figured if he sold you out to me, he could just take the North Docks too. Never trust a leech." Silas stepped in front of Clara, his body expanding, bones cracking as he prepared to shift. "Run, Clara. Get to the panic room." "I'm not leaving you!" Clara screamed. "Go!" Silas roared, his voice distorting into a growl. He launched himself at the wave of attackers. It was a blur of violence. Silas was a whirlwind, fighting with the desperation of a king protecting his queen. He tore through the first line of betas, his strength far superior even in human form. But there were too many of them. Clara scrambled toward the panic room at the back of the warehouse, but a hand grabbed her hair, yanking her back. She screamed, clawing at the arm. It was a woman, a shifter with cold blue eyes. She slammed Clara against the wall, holding a knife to her throat. "Stay down, human!" the woman hissed. "No!" Clara gasped. She watched helplessly as 3 wolves tackled Silas. They had silver chains, thick, glowing with runes. They wrapped them around his limbs, burning his skin. The smell of searing flesh filled the air. Silas roared in agony, falling to his knees. He was pinned, bleeding, unable to shift fully because of the silver. Declan walked up to him, casually kicking Silas in the ribs. Silas spat blood onto the concrete. "Look at you," Declan sneered. "The great Alpha King, brought down by a woman." Declan crouched down, grabbing Silas by the hair and forcing him to look at Clara, who was being held at knife point. "This is your weakness, Silas," Declan said. "You tied your life to hers. The moment she saved you, she became your anchor. And anchors, they just weigh you down." Declan stood up and pulled a heavy pistol from his waistband. He didn't aim it at Silas. He aimed it at Clara. "No!" Silas screamed, struggling against the chains, his eyes bleeding into pure black. "Take me!" "Let her go, Declan. The challenge is between us." "The challenge is over," Declan said coldly, "but I can't have a human running around who knows our secrets. And besides," he smirked, "if I kill her, the shock of the broken bond will cripple you. Then I can take my time killing you." Clara stared down the barrel of the gun. Time seemed to slow. She looked at Silas. He was looking at her with absolute devastation. "I'm sorry," he mouthed. Clara felt a strange heat rising in her chest. It wasn't fear. It was anger. Burning, white-hot anger. She remembered the river. She remembered the weight of the wolf. She remembered pulling him back from death. What belongs to the woods stays in the woods. "Hey, Declan!" Clara yelled, her voice steady. Declan blinked, surprised by her outburst. "Any last words, sweetheart?" "Yeah," Clara said, her eyes locking onto the fire extinguisher mounted on the wall right next to the woman holding her. "Catch!" She stomped hard on the woman's instep, breaking the bone. As the woman shrieked and loosened her grip, Clara grabbed the extinguisher and swung it with all her might. It slammed into the woman's face with a sickening crunch. Clara didn't stop. She pulled the pin and sprayed the white chemical fog directly at Declan. "Silas, now!" she screamed. Blinded by the fog, Declan fired wildly. The bullet pinged off the steel beam above Clara's head. Silas, fueled by Clara's defiance and the surge of adrenaline, roared. The bond between them flared, a transfer of energy that defied physics. He felt her rage, and it fed him. With a snap that sounded like a gunshot, Silas broke the silver chains. He didn't shift. He didn't need to. He launched himself through the fog, tackling Declan. They crashed into the concrete floor, fists flying. "Kill them all!" Declan screamed to his pack. The wolves surged forward. Silas was fighting Declan, but 10 others were closing in on Clara. Clara backed into the corner, holding the empty extinguisher like a club. She was going to die. She knew it. But she wasn't going to die screaming. Suddenly, the warehouse skylights shattered. Ropes dropped from the darkness above. Figures in black tactical gear descended, rappelling down with military precision. Gunfire, suppressed, rhythmic, erupted. The wolves attacking Clara dropped, tranquilizer darts feathering their necks. A figure landed softly in front of Clara. He turned. It was a man with pale skin and dark sunglasses, holding dual pistols loaded with what looked like UV rounds. It wasn't the police. "Mr. St. James changed his mind," the vampire said smoothly. "He realized that if Declan wins, the price of real estate drops, and we can't have that." Victor hadn't betrayed them, or rather, he had betrayed them, and then betrayed Declan right back when the math worked out in his favor. The tide turned. With the vampire hit squad keeping the pack at bay, Silas had Declan alone. Silas pinned Declan to the ground, his hand wrapped around his throat. "Yield," Silas growled, his eyes burning gold. "Or die." Declan gasped, his face purple. He looked at his fallen pack, at the vampires, at Clara standing amidst the chaos with a dented fire extinguisher. "Yield!" Declan choked out. Silas held him for a second longer, the beast demanding blood. Then he shoved Declan away. "Get out!" Silas commanded the room. "Take him, lock him in the darkest cell beneath the estate. If he sees the sun again, I kill every single one of you." The remaining wolves, seeing their alpha defeated, lowered their heads. The hierarchy had shifted back. Silas stood up, swaying slightly. He was covered in blood, burns and bruises. He turned to Clara. He didn't say a word. He walked to her, took the fire extinguisher from her shaking hands, and pulled her into his arms. He buried his face in her neck, breathing in the scent of ozone and timber. "You," Silas whispered against her skin, "are the most dangerous thing I have ever met." Clara laughed, a sob catching in her throat and hugged him back. "I told you. Don't touch the wolf." "Too late," Silas murmured, kissing the top of her head. "You touched him. He's yours." 3 months later. The snow had melted in Oakhaven, replaced by the vibrant green of spring. The Blackwood River was calm, glistening under the sun. Clara sat on the porch of her aunt's cabin. It had been renovated. The roof was fixed, the windows insulated, and there was a new addition, a high-tech security system that rivaled the Pentagon. A matte black Range Rover pulled up the gravel driveway. Silas stepped out. He looked healthier, stronger. The scars from the silver chains had faded to faint white lines on his wrists. He carried a box of pastries from a bakery in Seattle, Clara's favorite. He walked up the steps and sat beside her on the swing. He didn't say anything for a long time, just watching the tree line. "The council ratified the claim yesterday," Silas said quietly. "Declan is in permanent exile. The territory is secure." "That's good," Clara said, taking a pastry. "Does that mean you have to go back to New York?" Silas turned to her. The golden fire in his eyes was warm now, like liquid honey. "The king sits where the queen is." Clara stopped chewing. "I thought we talked about titles. I'm a graphic designer, Silas." "You can be a graphic designer," Silas said, reaching into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a small velvet box. "But you can also be the one person the Alpha answers to." He opened the box. Inside was a ring. It wasn't a diamond. It was a piece of raw, uncut amber, set in a band of black titanium. It looked like a wolf's eye. "The pack knows what you did," Silas said. "They know you saved me. They know you fought for me. By our laws, you earned your place. But I don't care about the laws. I care that you're the only person who saw a monster drowning in the river and decided he was worth saving." He took the ring out. "Clara, will you take the risk? Will you stay in the woods with me?" Clara looked at the ring, then at the man who had turned her quiet life into a hurricane. She looked at the woods, no longer a place of fear, but a place of belonging. She smiled, extending her hand. "Only if you promise to do the dishes," she said. Silas laughed, a rich, deep sound that startled the birds from the trees. He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. "Deal," the Alpha King said. And as he kissed her, deep in the forest, a wolf howled, not in warning, but in celebration. And that is the story of how Clara saved the wolf and captured the king. It turns out, sometimes the monsters under the bed aren't monsters at all. They're just waiting for the right person to turn on the light. If you enjoyed this roller coaster of romance, betrayal, and werewolf politics, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a story. What would you do if you found a wolf in the river? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.